So I'm really pleased to welcome on stage Sofia Calltorp, Director of UN Women Geneva Office and Chief of the Humanitarian Action. Welcome, Sofia. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that warm welcome. It's a great honor for me to be here and inaugurate this session. Esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests, this session is co-hosted by UN Women and UNEP Finance Initiative, and as said, we will be focusing on the vital role of banks in closing gender gaps. In recent years, we have seen remarkable progress in promoting gender equality in financial services, both for and by women as employees, leaders, entrepreneurs, and customers. Just to give you a few examples. Across the globe, millions of women now access financial resources that were once out of reach, representing increased capacity to invest in their businesses, secure their family's well-being, and build resilience against life's uncertainties, including climate change. Secondly, financial institutions around the world are now driving gender-lens investing at scale, accounting for over a third of all gender bond issuances globally. And lastly, women now make up over half of the banking workforce, representation levels that many other sectors are yet to reach. These achievements remind us of what is possible when vision, action, and commitment align. But yet, as we know, there is more work to do. While women now make up over half of the banking workforce, they still represent under a quarter of the executive teams. And sustainable finance flows targeting gender equality remain scarce compared to capital raised for other impact objectives. Women entrepreneurs also continue to face a staggering 1.5 trillion credit gap, and 742 million women globally remain excluded from formal financial systems. Those figures are staggering and is showcasing the need to really tackle this issue. But we are not here today just to reaffirm the why, but we are also here to focus on the how. How can we drive meaningful change? And what is new in advancing those efforts? Well, what is new is that we are no longer operating in silos. We now recognize that supporting women in one role, whether as employees, leaders, business owners, or consumers, creates ripple effects across others. When a bank promotes women into leadership, it signals to women entrepreneurs that their growth is supported by leaders who understand their needs. And when leaders drive a gender-responsive corporate culture, this transforms the bank's external business too, unlocking new customer segments and unmet demand. When a bank tailors a product for women consumers, it empowers women to invest, save, and grow their wealth, fostering market growth and economic stability. We also know that it's not enough to simply hire more women. We must create environments where they can lead and flourish. We know that it's not good enough to solely market products to women, but products must be designed with their unique financial journeys in mind. What is also new is that we have tools and strategies from a critical mass of organizations and banks that have experimented, documented, and improved the ways in which banking industry can concretely contribute to gender equality. And today, we are delighted to share some new guidance published jointly by UN Women and UNEP Finance Initiative, which provides a holistic view on how banks can drive this change through the combined lenses of the principles for responsible banking and the women's empowerment principles subscribed to by hundreds of banks worldwide. So the question before us is no longer why invest in women, it is how do we harness these pragmatic tools, no matter where a bank is on its gender equality journey, to establish an ecosystem in which women thrive in their workplace, marketplace, and community. And further, how can these resources be leveraged by banks to set measurable targets and establish gender-responsive leadership, which establishes gender equality as a whole of organization priority and creates a work environment in which all employees can thrive? There is also the question on how can those tools be used by banks to shift portfolios, embed gender equality into risk and impact frameworks, improve women's financial health and inclusion, and act as advocates for gender equality across the bank's ecosystem. I look very much forward to an extremely rich conversation around those questions, and now welcome Alexandra Lockyer from UN Women and Laura Diaz from UNEP Financial Initiative, who are the co-authors of the guidance and that will moderate this discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to be here. It gives me newfound respect for my lecturers because this is intimidating, but hello. I'm Laura Diaz, and I'm here with Alex. Alex, I'm so excited. A whole year working on this, and we finally met in person this week. This is crazy.
Luckily not on stage for the first time, but yes.
True, true. And we're here together with amazing women in this panel.
We are. We're delighted that we have three wonderful women joining us on this panel. Dawn Bailey from Bank of Ireland. Dawn Bailey is a trailblazer in advancing financial inclusion, literacy and resilience in Ireland as Bank of Ireland's head of financial well-being. The initiatives she's led emphasize the importance of deeply understanding customer needs and vulnerabilities in the area of financial health. Her leadership extends to co-leading UNEP FI's working group on financial health and inclusion and UNEP FI and UN Women's working group on gender equality. So she is also driving transformative change at a global scale. Next to me is Verónica Gavilanes Véjar, who is an Ecuadorian leader in financial inclusion and sustainable development. She has driven transformative initiatives advancing financial and digital inclusion for underserved communities in Ecuador and Bolivia. As Deputy General Manager at BancoSol, she's led the Avanza Mujer program and strategy, which we will learn more about shortly, and launched Bolivia's first ever gender bond. Set to become the General Manager in January 2025, she is redefining inclusive banking in Latin America. And last but not least, we have Wendy Teleki, who champions women's economic empowerment as the head of the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative Secretariat at the World Bank, an initiative that has allocated over $360 million and helped catalyze $5.3 billion in financing for women entrepreneurs in over 80 countries since its creation in 2017. In that role, Wendy has driven the creation of the WeFi Code, which is now being rolled out in over 30 countries around the world. Named a Forbes 50 over 50 in finance, Wendy is a global leader in gender equality and co-author of Rebalance: How Women Lead, Parent, Partner and Thrive, Inspiring New Generations of Leaders Around the World. So welcome to all of you. And Wendy, I'd love to start with you, if that's okay. So we know that there are lots of good intentions when it comes to gender equality, but often they fail to drive transformative change. So in your role, you engage with banks and players across the financial ecosystem all the time. And I would love to hear one of the main misconceptions, actually, that you've seen in your conversations with them and how we can change that.
Thanks, and thanks so much for having me here. It's really delightful to be here today. WeFi, the program that I run that is housed in the World Bank but works across all of the multilateral development banks, works with many financial institutions around the world. We're working with about 400 different institutions. About half of them are financial institutions. And we work with them on a broad range of activities, not just funding, but also their own capacity and training and product design. And I would say the number one thing when we go into a bank that's, never really thought about this area, and we say, tell us about what you're doing with women, and they say, oh, we're doing great with women and women entrepreneurs. We never discriminate. Any woman can walk into our offices, and they're very welcome to apply for loans and get loans or equity or whatever. And then we say, well, can you show us the data? Let us know what's actually, what your portfolio looks like. Where are the women in your portfolio? How much financing is going to them? And usually the answer is they don't have the data. So they don't actually know. And if we do get to a point where we help them build the data, or if they do have the data, it's an eye-opener. They're generally really surprised by how little they're actually providing in financing to women, and especially women entrepreneurs, which is where I'm looking. So what we see is that banks that don't have an intentional approach to serving women and women entrepreneurs are really falling short of being able to fully serve the market. And it's not unsurprising. We know that women, especially women entrepreneurs, have many challenges that they face. They face many barriers to scaling and growing their businesses, and therefore women-led businesses tend to be smaller. They often have lower margins. They often don't have the same access to collateral that male-owned businesses do. And sometimes the women either don't have the confidence to apply for a loan, or they don't have the financial skills or literacy or sometimes digital skills to do that. But at the same time, the financial institutions often haven't developed their own capacity and done their own rigorous analysis, starting with not having the data. But once you have the data, to really rigorously analyze that and understand how best to serve the women in the market. And what we find is that women, well, I think it's very well known that women generally are better credit risks than men. I mean, most of the data that you see around the world shows that. But also what we see is women are more loyal customers, and once they're committed to a financial institution, they're more likely to purchase multiple services from them. So the broad mix is very advantageous for banks. But banks aren't really taking that and designing products and thinking about how they serve women effectively in these markets. So what we do is really work with them not only to get financing, and as you mentioned, we've helped get about $5.3 billion in financing out to women by providing equity and debt guarantees and other mechanisms, but we're also providing training and capacity building to develop products and services in the markets, to understand the market, but also to figure out what women need specifically and how to get things to them, like loans that don't require collateral, cash flow-based loans, et cetera. And we also have them shine a mirror on themselves, because we know that banks that don't really have good policies and procedures for their internal gender awareness and promoting women and putting women into leadership positions in their financial institution are just not going to be as welcoming to women, and they're not going to be thinking about the products and services really holistically that will serve the women's market. So you really need to look across all of those things, and that's what we try to do with our partners.
Thanks, Wendy. That's brilliant, and I think I'm so glad you highlighted the need for an intentional design and the data point, which is so important. I think gender disaggregated data is really the key to being able to inform those strategies and drive transformative change for customers, as you said, women as customers, but also employees. And you know, there are relevant data considerations as well for corporate banks engaging with their corporate clients on gender-related risks and opportunities. So I'm glad that gender disaggregated data has been put right at the fore.
Yeah, and indeed on this topic of strategies, the way to make them truly holistic is through getting that data that is going to guide the decision-making and making better initiatives. And while making the guidance on gender equality, we saw different examples. And one of those is BancoSol, of having a holistic gender strategy in what they're doing. And Verónica, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this transformative approach that you've had to gender equality?
Thank you. Thank you, dear Laura. Good afternoon. First, I want to express my gratitude to the opportunity to share the impactful work we are doing at the BancoSol. It's truly an honor to be here and participate in this important discussion. However, I would like to acknowledge I'm not yet fluent in English, so I will my answer in Spanish. Thank you for your support, dear Laura, and I prepared some slides for support this presentation. In BancoSol, nosotros hemos trabajado hace 32 años en la inclusión financiera, brindando acceso a la población que antes estaba totalmente excluida de los servicios financieros formales. La inclusión financiera es un pilar fundamental para sostener el desarrollo social y económico de los países. En ese sentido, conscientes de de la situación única de los bancos para ser agentes de transformación y de cambio. En el año 22 planteamos una estrategia intencional de ir por la ruta de sostenibilidad y nos adherimos a 2 marcos importantes. El primero, los principios de banca responsable de Naciones Unidas y la asignación y la firma de los principios de empoderamiento de la mujer. Y también hemos tenido la oportunidad de participar en el piloto 2.0 Business Accelerator de ONU Mujeres. Eso nos ha permitido marcar una ruta clara de dónde estamos hoy en el aspecto holístico, de dónde estábamos en el 22 en el aspecto holístico de la organización y hacia dónde teníamos que ir. Del pilar de sostenibilidad se decanta la estrategia de diversidad, igualdad e inclusión del banco y obviamente diseñamos toda una aproximación bien completa, primero desde el área de liderazgo del banco, desde la parte interna y de establecer una cultura en donde se sensibilice el por qué es importante ser abiertos a la diversidad. Ahí estructuramos basados en data también y con la escucha a las clientes todo el programa Avanza Mujer. Avanza Mujer vino con un apoyo del IFC a identificar claramente dónde estaban las oportunidades de nuestro banco para atender al mercado de la mujer. Y cuando abrimos la data desagregada por género, vimos que todavía, a pesar de ser un banco de inclusión financiera, teníamos una brecha importante entre hombres y mujeres. En Bolivia, la brecha de financiamiento es de 36 puntos porcentuales. Las mujeres han accedido en una menor proporción al financiamiento. También 5 de cada 10 negocios son liderados por mujeres en Bolivia y el 82% de las mujeres trabajan en condición informal. Es por eso que la institución es muy intencional en el tema del enfoque de género. Avanza Mujer también tiene toda una oferta de productos y servicios ligados al financiamiento, a seguros, pero también a los servicios de valor agregado, herramientas que les permiten a las mujeres adquirir nuevos conocimientos y competencias. Apostar por las mujeres es apostar por el progreso. Y esta aproximación holística también en la cadena de valor, también estamos muy intencionales en los temas de la comunidad, de cómo ser un agente intencional de cambio, de sensibilización a nivel del país, también con la sensibilización a los temas del marco regulatorio, y por eso hemos podido también lograr el primer bono social etiquetado en género.
You know, I love something you said, and I hope after this session everyone leaves here already understanding Spanish, right? No, but the key ideas of everything that Verónica is saying in Spanish is shown in the slides that you see up here. And Verónica, you said something. Cuando apuestas por la mujer, apuestas por el progreso. When you bet on women, you're betting on progress. Right? And you're saying this because you have amazing results of that bet that you did. Why don't you share a little bit about these results that you've achieved?
Bueno, uno de los primeros cambios importantes en la organización es que en el año 22 no había una sola mujer, 0 mujeres en el liderazgo del banco. Todos eran hombres. Y en estos 3 años hemos pasado a tener 33% de mujeres, incluida la gerencia general del banco. Creo que ese es un cambio importante. Gracias. Yes. Y muy interesante, porque cuando las mujeres entramos a los sitios donde se toman decisiones, pasan cosas muy interesantes, ¿no? Primero, obviamente, la mirada holística, el aporte diferenciado que aporta creatividad, innovación, una visión sostenible, el desempeño social, el impacto social como algo relevante. Luego también el board tiene 42% de participación de mujeres, entonces este alineamiento desde el más alto nivel es clave para crear un entorno inclusivo. Si queremos hablar al mercado de la mujer, tenemos que ser coherentes internamente. El banco también está en una transformación digital importante y esta transformación digital es muy intencional en las mujeres en posiciones de STEM, porque cuando desarrollas modelos, obviamente de riesgos, tienen que también tener la mirada intencional de comprender las diferencias de comportamiento entre hombres y mujeres. Nuestra fuerza laboral representa el 53% de mujeres y hay algo muy interesante. Estamos siendo un empleador atractivo en el país, no solo para las mujeres, sino también para los jóvenes, que cada vez más buscan entornos obviamente respetuosos y también donde tengan oportunidades de desarrollarse indistintamente del género. En el impacto hacia las clientes, nos va excelente en resultados. El banco en este año en el país ha duplicado la tasa de crecimiento en crédito y ha cuadruplicado la tasa de crecimiento en captaciones. Las mujeres son excelentes clientes, el mercado está desatendido, con lo cual si somos intencionales en atendernos, nos va a ir muy bien en resultados. La tasa de crecimiento de nuestras clientes de crédito es 50% más alta que la de los hombres. Y no porque no atendamos a los hombres, sino porque hemos sido intencionales con las mujeres. En el caso de la tasa de portafolio, también 32% es la tasa de crecimiento en monto otorgado a las mujeres. Han recibido las mujeres en general en todo el país con muy buenos ojos la propuesta de Avanza Mujer y obviamente la adquisición también de clientes se ha triplicado. En la construcción de capacidades hemos formado a más de 20,000 mujeres y lógicamente estamos midiendo el impacto con 60 decibeles, es una de las mediciones que hacemos, esta medición obviamente de impacto social que está alrededor del mundo, y el 82% de nuestras clientes dicen que sus negocios han crecido a partir de recibir el crédito. Eso es importante. También el 50% de las mujeres se sienten que sus condiciones de vida han mejorado. Entonces, para nosotros es importante también medir el impacto. Y otro tema relevante es el mercado. Hemos diseñado el primer premio al periodismo con enfoque de género, recibiendo más de 100 propuestas de distintos medios, y eso es clave para cambiar la narrativa en el país. Y hemos acompañado también el reconocimiento de las mujeres. Un actor fundamental para nosotros en este proceso ha sido ONU Mujeres, que también desde la sede de Nueva York y Bolivia nos ha acompañado en toda esta ruta de crecimiento. Entonces, cuando eres intencional, sí se puede cambiar la narrativa, sí se puede atender a las mujeres, no solo dentro del banco, sino impulsar el desarrollo del país.
Sorry, I'm trying to do the switch from Spanish to English. It takes me a while sometimes. But Verónica, I just love the fact that you're telling us it's not just about what you do inside the bank. You also need to be doing a lot outside the bank. So it's the workplace, the marketplace, and the community, talking about this award with the press, right? And so it's very important to have both, or the three aspects, right? Workplace, marketplace, and the community. Dawn, I'm gonna head now to you, because Bank of Ireland has experience also in trying to cover these three aspects. Why don't you share a little bit more about that role, or how Bank of Ireland thinks about women empowerment?
Sure. I guess we probably started where most banks start, back in 2017, thinking about gender equality, looking at our workforce in terms of a broader inclusion and diversity strategy and trying to see where the gaps were. At the time, just over half of our colleagues were women, but we had a significant majority of women at junior levels and a significant majority of men at senior levels. So in 2018, we set a target to hit a 50-50 target in terms of appointments to all senior roles. And we were progressing well for the first couple of years, but then COVID hit and we hit a setback. To give you a sense of the scale of the setback, in Q1 2020, only 23% of applicants to senior roles were women. And we knew that wasn't unique to us. I mean, you know, there's lots of studies that show the disproportionate impact of COVID on women, but we did have to take a number of steps to right our course, and it took us a while to regain momentum. We created two specific career development programs for women colleagues, one for those at lower grades and one for those in more senior grades, which I was lucky to take part in. We implemented a number of progressive policies around parents' leave, hybrid working to better support work-life balance, fertility leave, a menopause policy. I could go on. And our progress continues. In the first half of this year, 46% of senior appointments were women, and that's having a really positive impact. So we now have senior female representation increased to 40% for the first time since we've been tracking it. And then thinking about this holistic piece, at the same time we were looking at that in terms of workforce, we were also looking at it in terms of financial health. So we started on a financial well-being journey in 2018. We created a first national financial health index with a score for the nation, and we were looking to see what customer cohorts over or under indexed. And then a few years later, we added a financial literacy index. And then we started to, following our commitment to financial health and inclusion, we started to track financial resilience nationally and for our customers. And when we started to dig into the data, it became clear that there's a gender gap in terms of all three: health, literacy, and resilience. And that's where the alignment across the organisation started to happen. I'll give you one really good example of different parts of the business coming together. We came together around victims of domestic violence. So COVID-19, we know, saw a significant uptick globally in cases of domestic violence. And we, on my side of the house in financial wellbeing, worked really closely with our people services colleagues to develop a policy to support colleagues who might be victims, while at the same time working to ensure survivors who were trying to establish their own financial identity, maybe coming out of a course of control situation, had equal and effective access, even if they had to flee their situation without having the proper ID and V, for example. We also then work together with the other two main banks in Ireland through the Irish Bank and Culture Board to train key workers in domestic violence shelters so they can better support their clients. And then at an industry level, to establish how the regulator or the central bank can better support victims who may have had their credit rating negatively impacted by the actions of their abuser. And so that's really talking to the ecosystem shift. I suppose the final piece of the puzzle relates to our portfolio shift in terms of supporting women-led and owned businesses. And I'm going to agree completely with you, Wendy. You know, while we have a number of funds focused in this area, we are still grappling with the challenges around data, around easily identifying those businesses that are female-owned or female-led and being able to disaggregate the data effectively. But by the three areas of the business coming together, we are making huge strides. And as we speak, we are in the process of becoming WEP's signatories. I had hoped I'd have it signed by today, but it's going to happen.
Thanks, Dawn. Dawn's doing her role as co-lead of our working group excellently there, because she's using the language directly from the guidance that we're launching today. So just to plug that for 1 second, the way that we've structured the guidance is really around 4 key areas where we've identified banks having a role to play in advancing gender equality and women's empowerment. So what you've heard from all of our panelists so far is around the kind of leadership and work environment, which is more internal. And then we have portfolio shift, which is what Dawn mentioned, which is really thinking about financing companies that are advancing gender equality or working with companies to improve their gender-related practices. We have financial health and inclusion, of course, for retail customers, so individuals and women entrepreneurs. And then we have a 4th area, which is ecosystem shift, which is more focused on broader collaboration across the bank's ecosystem. So thank you, Dawn, for using that language. But I just wanted to come back on the data point for a second, because I know Bank of Ireland's been doing a lot of work, actually, to dig into its women customers and really start to understand their needs, priorities a little bit more. So I wondered if you could tell us just a little bit more about the work you've been doing.
No problem at all. I think first to say we haven't cracked it yet, right? We're still on a journey. As financial institutions are awash with data. We have so much data that actually sometimes we don't know what to do with it. And the challenge can sometimes be to successfully identify what are the key data points that we need to track and monitor, and to ensure we're really considered in how we interpret the data, that we're not confusing causation and correlation, and that we're not introducing an element of unconscious bias. And all of that framed in terms of GDPR and data protection. So it's not simple. So when we started our measurement of financial health nationally, we could see very clearly there was almost a 10% gap in terms of gender and financial health. That same gap exists in financial literacy, and it's even wider in terms of financial resilience. And financial resilience is the ability to be able to withstand an everyday unexpected household expense and or the impact of a major life event, so such as loss of a partner, job loss, serious illness, bereavement. And while that data that we were looking at is a nationally representative survey, we could also see that among our own customers when we developed an observed financial well-being score for our active current account customers. And it's not a huge surprise, okay? So we know there's a gender pay gap. We know there's a national pensions gap. We know that most lone parents are women, and they tend to be a cohort that are less financially resilient. And there's also some well-documented differences in terms of risk appetite when it comes to investment behaviour and lower levels of planning ahead. And then we started to dig a bit deeper in terms of international research and trying to see how we could shift the dial. What do we know about what women want from their bank? Do we understand what the barriers are in terms of financial confidence, which you mentioned earlier? And has anyone else cracked that challenge anywhere else? Which is why, having been co-lead of the Commitment to Financial Health and Inclusion, I was really happy to step back up and co-lead. Not that well, Lara bullied me a little bit, but we won't.
It was never voluntary.
No, well, you know.
There wasn't never a choice.
I tried to say no. But the current phase we're undertaking is twofold. One, doing a deep dive into the data that we do track and running some regression analysis to remove the impact of exogenous or external factors. We're working with Professor Elaine Kempson on that. And then starting to disaggregate response rates to communications. So do we know, is there a difference in the level of engagement with our communications? Do we know if more men than women click on a link in our app? Do we know how many people by gender open an email message? When do they drop off? Are we speaking their language or are actually unconsciously turning them away by how we are communicating? And that's our journey for personal customers, but for female-led businesses, as I've said earlier, we're much earlier in the journey. And there are bigger challenges in getting the data. But it's a small country, and we're a pillar bank, and we're very much part of the wider financial and societal ecosystem. So we're confident that we'll get there, even if it is a longer journey.
Fab, thanks, Dawn. It's so interesting to hear about that kind of deep work happening that you're doing, and I know you're a driving force of that in the bank. So please continue to do so on behalf of all of us. And Wendy, I know that the We Finance Code has a set of indicators that you're encouraging all signatories to track, which I'm sure you'll talk more about in a second. But they're also included in our guidance, along with other indicators that banks can use to track their impact across the 4 different areas I mentioned before, which we've tried to align with existing standards, frameworks, externally, including the Women's Empowerment Principles, 2X Global, We Finance Code, Financial Alliance for Women. So we've put them all together, and we hope that that can be a useful tool and resource for those starting out on their gender disaggregated data journey, because as you just said, it very much is that. But Verónica, coming back to you for a second, so something that is just so exciting was Bolivia's first ever gender bond issuance earlier this year by BancoSol. And I know that you were also involved in the first ever gender bond in Ecuador as well. So I would love for you to just share a little more about that and any kind of key takeaways that you learned through that process that you think other banks in the audience might benefit from.
Thank you. Tú has mencionado un tema muy importante y es el ecosistema. Cuando trabajamos por el empoderamiento económico de las mujeres y la independencia de las mujeres, el ecosistema tiene que, obviamente, crear un entorno propicio para impulsar esta agenda. Y los bancos estamos en una situación única y particular para hacerlo. Creo que el primer bono social etiquetado en género en Bolivia tuvo que ver con que el banco fue un agente clave para alinear todo lo que se requería para el lanzamiento del bono. Primero, obviamente, estructurar internamente el programa, pero luego mover el ecosistema, inclusive trabajando con el regulador, ¿no? Para poder tener este lanzamiento del bono. Entonces, somos agentes de cambio. El bono también ha contado con el apoyo de instituciones como UEFI, thank you, Wendy, y del IDB. El IDB nos garantizó al 50%. El bono fue emitido en moneda local. Bolivia hoy está enfrentando, digamos, una situación también macroeconómica compleja. Y creo que el momento clave fue la respuesta del mercado. Porque era un instrumento que salía en moneda local a 5 años plazo y el apetito de los inversionistas es lo que nos sorprendió. Esta fue claramente un ejemplo al mercado de capitales de Bolivia que se comprometió con el propósito de las finanzas sostenibles y de apoyar a las mujeres. Tuvo una sobredemanda del 16%. Los tenedores, los compradores del bono fue el sector público a través de la gestora pública que compró la mitad del bono y la otra mitad fue inversionistas del sistema financiero privado. Quiero contar una historia. Cuando emitimos el bono, las mujeres iban a las agencias del banco a decir quiero invertir en el bono. Entonces, obviamente, eso es muy revelador respecto del apetito que cada vez más la gente tiene sobre esta conciencia del impacto social. Creo que ha sido un esfuerzo colaborativo y obviamente es un camino sin retorno. Esperamos que no sea el único que emite el banco, pero sobre todo que no sea el primero y el único que emite el sistema financiero boliviano. Se ha despertado una conciencia y hemos dado también un paso importante a traer recursos también de fuera a Latinoamérica. Latinoamérica está siendo obviamente un agente de cambio en el tema de bonos sociales, etiquetados, bonos sostenibles. Aquí hemos visto instituciones fantásticas de Latinoamérica, Bolivariano, Produbanco, Pichincha, que están impulsando obviamente esta agenda y es para nosotros un privilegio haber sido este agente de cambio intencional.
I really want to share something that Verónica just mentioned, because it's definitely not on the slide that you are reading in English, and it's the story she just shared. When they issued the gender bond, they had their female customers, the individual customers, so from the personal banking side of the business, coming into the branches and saying, hi, I want to invest in the gender bond. And that just showed them that there's definitely room in Bolivia for this kind of purpose to really advance gender equality. And we thought that was such a beautiful story. And it's just, another way in which banks are innovating is through these gender bonds, through their data approaches. But of course, there's another way in which banks can innovate in their ecosystem approach. And Wendy, you can tell us a little bit more about that with the Wi-Fi code and other ways in which banks can interact with their ecosystems. And I'm also very happy to share that just as UN Women has done it before, UNEP FI has joined as a member for the Wi-Fi code this week. So yay, we're very excited to be part of this initiative.
Yeah, we're super excited to be aligning the work that you're doing with Wi-Fi and for you to be joining as a global partner and joining UN Women, by the way, which is already a global partner in the We Finance Code. So let me share a little bit about why we have the We Finance Code, and I'll talk a little bit about how it works. But I mentioned earlier that we work with a lot of individual financial institutions, and we have activities that we've supported in 80 countries around the world. But what we found is, every institution we go to, we have the same conversations. And a single institution can't always solve all of the problems that women face in getting access to finance. And so we started asking ourselves, we work across all of the MDBs, so the World Bank, IFC, IDB, ADB, EBRD, African Development Bank, and they work with financial institutions around the world, but also with the central banks, with the finance ministries and others. And we started to say, how do we do more than just work with all these individual institutions? And we came up, we actually learned from an example in the UK called the Investing in Women Code. And we thought, this is something maybe we could take to other countries, to take a systems approach to addressing the gaps, the $1.7 trillion financing gap that women entrepreneurs face around the world, by bringing together the financial institutions, the regulators, the central banks, and the ecosystem. And we now have 30 countries that are launching the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Code around the world. In developing countries, it kind of matches the program in the UK, and there's also in the Netherlands something called Code V, which is doing the same thing. And I'll just give you an example. About a month ago, Nigeria launched Code V. And at the launch of Code V, which was sponsored by the Central Bank, the Development Bank of Nigeria, and the Bank of Industry, they got 30 institutions, financial institutions from around the country to sign on to the code, committing to 3 things, which are very much in line with the WEPs and the UNEP FI guidance. And that's why we're so excited to have all this be so aligned. The first commitment they make is to have a champion in their organization who will be leading the institution's work to support women entrepreneurs and women more broadly. The second is that they will track the data on access to finance, and that will be reported to a national aggregator. In turn, we are collecting that data on the aggregate information of how much financing is going to women with OECD, so that we'll have a global snapshot of the trends of how much financing is going to women. But at the FI level, they'll have the data they need to do the analysis of what more they should be doing. And the third thing they do is commit to taking other actions that might be either working on the demand side or working on the supply side of financing. So they might develop training or incubation programs, but they might also put new financing or equity lines out for women entrepreneurs. And just as important as the individual commitments that each financial institution makes, they work together to build a coalition to think about what the broader ecosystem issues are. They bring in training organizations, they bring in ecosystem builders, they bring in the development banks that can provide financing and provide incentives to do more to support women entrepreneurs. So really getting the entire system to be thinking about how do we use this data, how do we leverage these champions, and how do we take collective action to move this work forward. Nigeria launched with 30 institutions signing onto the code about a month ago, and I just found out they now have 90 institutions signed onto the code. And we're going to be replicating that in 30 countries. We have another dozen countries that have been talking to me about joining the code, so we're really looking forward to this becoming a global movement, creating a systemic access to data that we will know globally how much financing is happening. And by the way, the first thing many of these coalitions do is create a definition for the country of women-led businesses, because it's not always easy for financial institutions to figure out what it should be. And this creates some harmonization around these indicators. You've provided some guidance also on definitions, so we want this to be really happening globally. So again, we're delighted to be partnering with UNEP FI, with UN Women on this, and really rolling this out systematically. So thank you.
No, that is great. And please go online and try to learn more about the WeFi code, because it's honestly a very, very impressive initiative.
I think something that's come out clearly throughout this conversation is really the systemic approach that a bank can and should take, with so many stakeholders it engages with across its ecosystem, and being really in the role of the financial center. You know, there's so many opportunities to influence others, to advance gender equality, to support women directly, and to work and to collaborate, as you've just outlined, Wendy, with broader policy institutions and other organizations as well. So with that in mind, and thinking big picture and ambitious action, I would love to start us to wrap up this panel by asking you all, if you were dreaming big, what is the boldest change that you can imagine in the banking industry to advance gender equality within the next 5 years, and something you would love to see? And Dawn, I'll start with you.
Okay, no pressure. I think it is that as financial institutions, we start to really play the pivotal role in terms of the societal shift that is needed in the road to women's empowerment. I mean, it takes an all-of-society response. It's been done for women in STEM, it's being done for women in sport, and I think we can all contribute effectively towards parity in terms of women in finance.
Motivating words, I love it. And Wendy, I'll come to you next.
Thank you. Well, we asked ourselves that question before we created the We Finance Code. So for me, it's really about bringing these coalitions together, signing on to the principles, signing on to the code, and really thinking about how you can work together and use champions in your organization. We have a theory of change that it really takes a person to start that process for an institution, but also for a country to launch the We Finance Code. So every individual has the power to make change in their institution. And then data, and making sure the data's there. You've said that's the journey that you're on. We all need to be on that journey, and we need to be making progress on that journey, and also learning from others. And we do a lot of peer learning on the code, just so that we can accelerate that process, so everybody doesn't have to struggle with that on their own when we're seeing solutions happening in different places. So,
Thanks, Wendy.
Bueno, creo que lo han dicho muy bien. Yo creo que es clarísimo la intencionalidad que deben tener los bancos para ir el camino y la ruta de finanzas sostenibles. Y creo que en 5 años tal vez no logremos todavía cerrar la brecha de financiamiento, pero queremos ser más intencionales en acelerar ese proceso. En América Latina, la brecha de financiamiento en los negocios liderados por mujeres es de 90,000 millones de dólares, con lo cual, si no sumamos esfuerzos intencionales, creativos y vamos por ese camino, creo que tomará más tiempo, ¿no? Creo que en 5 años podemos estar muy cerca de cerrar la brecha, y eso se demuestra claramente porque las mujeres están ahí y son excelentes clientes bancarios. Y otra cosa que el sistema financiero creo que debe ser intencional es incorporar más mujeres en las tomas de decisiones. Creo que las mujeres están preparadas, la industria financiera lo ha demostrado. Y esa intencionalidad trae buenos resultados sin duda a la mesa.
Thank you for that. And now I'm going to ask a final question. And it's also for the three of you. And that's because we have banks in the audience. And I think all of you here right now, you want to move from the good intentions to action and really drive change, right? And so that's my question. What is a simple step that the banks that are here in the audience can take right now after this session? And I'm going to start the other way around. We're going to have Dawn be the last one. So, Verónica, what do you think?
Creo que debemos respondernos una sola pregunta a todos los que estamos en el sector financiero. ¿Cuál es el aporte de valor que trae a la institución y al país en términos integrales? El implementar la estrategia de género transversal pasando de la intención a la acción. Creo que solamente con el dato del IFC de que 1.7 billones de dólares adicionales en ingresos al sistema financiero es una de las principales respuestas, pero creo que sobre todo es el impacto social y económico. Nosotros en el banco decimos, when a woman advances, we all move forward.
And I would say, get the data, find the data, and use the data to actually design services that are going to meet the needs of women and women entrepreneurs in your market so that we can really accelerate growth.
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, well, my answer is also, well, I have two, right? So I'll just say it's get the data, but find who the data owner is within your business. Identify the data points and start to disaggregate. And I think find out how other banks, as you've said, are addressing the challenges. We're great believers in stealing with pride. If we have a challenge, you can guarantee there's another bank in the UNPRB ecosystem who's had the same challenge, and people are more than willing to share, the solutions that they've gotten. And then the second key thing from a bank perspective is to find your tribe. Look to create a coalition of the willing within your organization. You're going to need someone from kind of the corporate side of the house, someone from HR or people services, someone from your consumer business, and then once you find your tribe, you can take the problem statement to senior leadership. But without the data and willing colleagues, it's a harder journey.
Thank you for that, Dawn. Alex, how about you? What do we think that this should be the first step that the bank should take?
I wonder. Well, obviously, we're going to be saying download our guidance, of course, which I think, looking at this somewhere, there should be a link available for you all. I'm not sure I can see it there.
That. No?
No? Okay, well, it's publicly available as of now, I believe, in this session, so you can all go straight away. But just before we go on to promoting the guidance a little bit more, Dawn, I just wanted to come back to you on one thing, which was just around the build your tribe thing that you've just said, because I think something that's been so valuable for us as we've done this working group together is actually you brought in colleagues from across your organization. And yeah, maybe you can just think about that process and how having those all three of you working with us on something, I think from our side it really helped us to shape a guidance that talked to all different aspects of the bank, and I hope from your side it was enabled you to collaborate and start to think about some new ideas and spark
Yeah, I think that was key, because I think when I was working on the health and inclusion commitment, I kind of was a little bit of a sole trader, and it felt like a much harder journey to go through governance and to get sign-off and agreement. But when you have the different divisions all pushing in the same direction, then you create that bigger wave of pressure on your senior leadership to sign up. And then you can also, I think, yes, unlock and understand activity that's happening around the organization that you might not be aware of, but then find ways to identify the benefits, I suppose the soft sell to the senior leadership, so that they're already prepped when the paper comes on their desk to sign, to say, yes, we're going to set targets in this area.
The inside scoop. Anyway, I presume you don't have a different answer, I believe, do you, to what the next action should be?
The next action should definitely be downloading the guidance. And just, Alex, help me out with this. because I always get the symbols wrong. Just let's tell them what's the link where they can download the guidance, since we're facing a little bit of a technical issue here with my slides.
It is www.unepfi.org/gender-guidance.
/gender-guidance.
Quite an easy one.
Yeah, it's a very, very easy one. They call it vanity links now.
Oh.
Yeah, I just learned that today. So there you go. So please go ahead, download the guidance. This is work that we created with 19 banks from all over the world with different backgrounds. So it's not just global banks. There's also regional banks and national banks, developing countries, developed countries. It's, I think we have all the points of view in there to build really a very thorough guidance that it's going to help your banks really drive change and an impact in advancing gender equality and women's empowerment. So please go ahead and download that. And also shout out for all the experts that helped us review from different organizations. It's honestly, I think a lot of work went into this, and you're going to like it.
Yeah, and it's not the end of the road either. I think just to say, if there's any banks in the audience who are interested in the topic, please do connect with us. We are planning our work for next year together again, so we'll be continuing work on this topic and look forward to hopefully collaborating with many of you here.
Yeah, so just again, for those that are watching online right now, and hello to everyone watching online. I know that our members are also watching us. I've been getting messages. I thought I put it in non-disturb, and I had the bank saying, Laura, I'm seeing you right now. We're so excited. So again, it's www.unepfi.org/gender-equality. No, gender guidance. Sorry about that. Gender-guidance. So yes, please go ahead and download the guidance. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Thank you so much to our panelists. And I think that would be it. Thank you so much, everyone.